Northeast Texas is absolutely loaded with skilled workers.
Welcome to Gone to Texas, the official podcast of the Texas Economic Development Connection. On every episode, we share the stories of business owners and CEOs who have relocated or expanded their business into Texas. Our goal is to use these stories as a guide to help others who are ready to hang a sign on the door that says, Gone to Texas. And now, please welcome your host, the managing partner and chief inspiration officer for Day One Experts, Super Dave Quinn.
All right, howdy friends, and welcome back. This is another episode of Gone to Texas. I'm your host, Super Dave Quinn, and today I'm joined by Gary Kappen with William Grant Tank and Vessel here in Henderson, Texas. I want to say thank you to the Henderson Economic Development Corporation for hosting us, allowing us to use their fine space here in Henderson, Texas, and for sponsoring this episode. Gary, thank you for your time, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So we really appreciate it. Kind of talked about what we're doing today and premise of the show. And what I want to get into is tell me about becoming the owner and operator and president of William Grant Tank and Vessel. Tell me that story.
You know, it's a cliche, but it really only in America, could my story exist. I was born in Shreveport. Don't know how far you want to go back, but we'd actually lived in Kilgore when I was born. We just drove across the border for me to be born. So I really don't know if I'm a native Texan or not. I wasn't born in Texas, but our address was Texas. And so I'm going to claim to be a Texan. In Shreveport, my dad worked for his father at Kappen's Airport Restaurant. They had a restaurant in the old airport, which later they sold to Dallas House Restaurants, which was a great big chain back in the day. And so whenever they sold, my dad went to work for Dallas House, and they moved him to, when I was one, they moved the family to Wichita, Kansas, and we spent about 4 years in Wichita, then Memphis, Tennessee, and then Louisville, Kentucky. So I grew up a big city boy. Those three cities are the largest cities in those three states. And when I was 13, my dad took a job with the Kettle Pancake House Restaurants. And, he told the family we're moving to Texas. I'm not even sure, after I left Texas at one, I really don't remember coming back to Texas. But, when he told the family you're moving to Texas, just that word Texas, you knew you were moving to a very exciting place. And we rolled into Henderson, Texas. Many of the things that I noticed right off the bat were there were a lot of pickup trucks. And back and this was 1975, a lot of the men wore hats and cowboy boots. And one of the things that really stood out to me was dogs riding in the back of pickups. That was a big, big thing. And it was a culture shock. Now, I grew up, although I didn't live in Texas, I grew up, my dad and I were both huge Dallas Cowboy fans. We loved the Cowboys. But in Louisville, we're 60 miles from Cincinnati, and so the Bengals were on every week, and it was seldom the Cowboys were on TV. You didn't have cable and all these packages like you have today. So every Tuesday when the paper came out, now keep in mind that the paper every day in Louisville was about as big around when it was rolled up as your wrist. And on Tuesday, the TV guide would be in the paper, and I would tear open the paper and look to see if by chance the Cowboys would be on TV. And normally they weren't, but when they were, it was a big deal. We're going to get to watch a full game on television. And it's something my dad and I did together. We lived for, now you're too young to remember Howard Cosell halftime highlights. We lived for the halftime highlights when we would get a glimpse of Tom Landry on the sideline, and they would just tell us about the Cowboys game. So we moved to Henderson, and the paper comes out. Now, the paper rolled up is about the size of your pinky. And I opened it up and looked at the schedule, and I said, "Hey, Dad, the Cowboys are on TV this week." He said, "Son, in Texas, the Cowboys are on TV every week." And so I thought we had moved to heaven. And one of the great memories is my dad and I going to the old Texas Stadium and seeing the Dallas Cowboys, live, Tom Landry, and all the greats. And so that was a big thing to be in Texas. We wound up renting a little house 15 miles south of Henderson, a small community called Laneville. It's just a crossroads community. And so, and we lived out in the country. And I had never been around any farm animals. And then I learned that there's a bull and a steer. And then I had to ask the question, what's the difference between a bull and a steer? And then the guy we rented from owned a lot of cattle, and he told me, I said, well, why would you do that? He said, well, he said, he said this in front of my dad. He said, I think you're old enough to understand it this way. He said, their mind goes from ass to grass. And I kind of realized, okay, I get it. It's all about growing that steer and to be a big,
it's
healthy
a product,
animal,
right?
and he needs to have his head down, in that grass. And so it was a tremendous culture shock. When I was in Louisville, I went to Myers Middle School. It was a newer school, 3 stories, wall-to-wall carpet, central air conditioned, monitor in every room. Every type class you can imagine that you could take, choir or orchestra, just so many opportunities. Then I wound up going to a school of about 500 students, K through 12. And it was an old rock building, no air conditioning, and there was one, gas stove heater or gas heater, in the corner. But I learned to love. I got involved in FFA, and you learn so much in ag class. And then I had an ag teacher, Bobby Bain, who was just a tremendous positive influence in my life. You learn so much about just life in ag. People don't realize that. But my plan was to always be in the restaurant business. That's what my grandfather did. That's what my father did. That's what my older brother did. And as soon as we moved to Henderson, I started working at the Kettle, bussing tables. And then I learned to cook. I was a cook. And then I helped my dad, in kind of the management area. And so I just always knew that I would graduate high school and go to work immediately in that restaurant business. And so when I was a senior, my dad's boss came to me and said, I understand you want to go to work in this business. And I said, yeah. He said, okay, well, as soon as you graduate, we're going to send you to several restaurants and let you fill in for managers as they go on vacation. And then when the summer's over, you will have your own restaurant, which was, I didn't have to go to college because I was kind of the class clown, and I tell people, and it's really sad but true, they vote on most likely to succeed. I probably would have been in, a runner-up for least likely to succeed. And so, I graduated and went to work for the Kettle Pancake House. And it was going great until they gave me an assignment I just couldn't handle. They sent me to a restaurant that was, had a lot of problems. And they wanted me to clean it up. They wanted me to, and I was working the night shift, overnight 10 to 2. They wanted me to bar some people from the restaurant, some people that they just didn't want coming in there anymore. And I was 19 years old, and I just couldn't handle it, and I just could not handle the task that they gave me, and I quit. The problem was I didn't have a plan B, and I didn't have an education. And my mother asked what I was going to do, and I said I don't know. And so she said, well. Of course, she worked in the Kettle as well. She said there's a gentleman that comes in every day, sits at the bar, and he owns a company in town, or he's part owner, the president of a company, Southwest Tank and Treater. And his name was Johnny Hedge. And she said, a few months ago, he saw you cooking in the kitchen and asked what you were doing after high school, and I told him that you had a plan. He said, okay, well, we like to hire people right out of high school, and just thought, he may, come talk to us. And so I said, okay, well, ask him if that opportunity is still available. And she did, and he said it was. And so I went and applied for a job at a pressure vessel manufacturing company, which I had absolutely
I was about to ask, do you have any idea what they were even used for?
Oh, absolutely not. I knew nothing. I was real good at flipping pancakes. And this is a welding shop. And so the lowest spot, the lowest job in a vessel shop is the warehouse attendant. That's the bottom of the barrel. And they hired me to be the warehouse attendant's helper. They created a new spot.
A new rung, just a little lower.
Right. And so I took that job at $4.25 an hour, back in 1982, and began to work hard and learn the business. And there was a half door that I stood at the warehouse, kind of looking out into the shop, and welders would come, ask me for the supplies, and I would hand them the supplies. And Eventually, the warehouse attendant quit, and I was promoted to the full-blown warehouse attendant. Of course, you're in the shop. You want to make more money, and more money was out in the shop.
Right.
You become a welder, then you become a fitter welder, and you move on up.
There's a pathway.
There's a pathway, and so I began to practice welding on my breaks and lunch, and got to where I was okay, not anywhere ready to pass a test, but eventually. Inventory controller quit, and they asked me if I wanted that job. Now, out the front door was the shop, through the back door was the office. And so instead of going to the shop to be a welder, I went out the back door into the office and worked in inventory control, and then I worked in purchasing, and then I moved to where I was doing estimating and sales, and then I became the manager of the shop operations. And I just learned to love the company, and I worked hard. And one of the things I learned is in the restaurant business is the ability to multitask. And when you've got 10 tickets up there and you've got to fill 10 orders, what I would do is just glance at those tickets and look at all of the meats and put all the meats on because they take the longest to cook. Then I would glance at the order and say, okay, well, now I need to put on the hash browns and the areas that don't take quite as long as the meats to cook. And then the very last, I would put the eggs and toast on, and it would all be ready at the same time.
But now they didn't teach you that. You just picked that up.
I just picked that up.
Okay.
Where all 10 of those plates would go out together, but you're just multitasking and you're prioritizing, and so I learned so much in the restaurant business that transitions to other areas, and I really became that employee that they just couldn't let go. Unfortunately, in the oil and gas business, there are great times and then there are miserable times. And, I survived some pretty serious layoffs, but I just worked really hard. I got involved in every area of the business that I could. So to be laid off, they would lose, someone that was involved in many different areas. I just didn't just do my job. I was constantly looking for ways to help the company. And I loved the company and was there 21 years. And, I even had dreams, that I would be with one company my entire career. But 21 years later, I was vice president of operations, running the shop operations of the company, and just decided it was time to move down the road. And I heard of a company that I knew in Kilgore that did structural fabrication and machining, but they did not build pressure vessels, and they did not carry the ASME code stamp. And they had expanded to Henderson, and they were going to abandon Kilgore and move to Henderson. And I called them. I said, hey, why don't you just stay in Henderson and let me work in your new facility and get you in the pressure vessel business? They said, come on. So I went over there and went through a startup in the pressure vessel business. We didn't have any equipment. We didn't have people. We didn't have the code stamp. And so we started from scratch getting in the vessel business. And 5 years later, we were very, very busy and doing very well in the vessel business. And, I thought, I've been 26 years in the industry, and I've been through a startup. Maybe time for me to move one more time.
But you've been working for other people.
Yeah, I've been working for other people. But I handled my position as if I owned the company. I made the decisions as if I was an owner. And even, my 21 years at Southwest, I felt like an owner. I was treated like, and I was okay working for the other guy. And so me and another gentleman, I'm the William in the business, he's the Grant. We took the two names we don't use. I'm William Gary. His name's Kelly Grant. I have an only son, William Christopher. He has an only son, Logan Grant. We took the two names we don't use and stuck them together and came up with William Grant. And then, if we had passed the company on to our sons, that's their name too.
Right.
And so, of course, I had the experience in the vessel business, and Kelly had a degree in accounting, and so that seemed like a perfect fit. We started William Grant Tank and Vessel, and we went to a local bank and said, we've got this business plan, we've got this experience, we've got these potential customers, the business is booming right now, we would like to start a business. And they weren't receptive. And so I went to a gentleman or Kelly and I both went and visited with a gentleman that was a business owner. We said, hey, give us some ideas. He said, he said, I want you to go see my banker. I don't know if he'll help you, but he can lead you in the right direction. So we went and saw his banker, and he said, I can't help you. He said, but you need to go see East Texas Regional Development Company in Kilgore, and they do SBA loans. And so